Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today is a successful poker player named Tony. There are a number of players in town for the World Series of Poker, and we're fortunate that Tony was able to break away and come visit us. Tony, welcome to Gambling with the Edge.
Hey, how you doing?
How did you get your first poker bankroll, and what happened to it?
Well, believe it or not, I actually was in college at the time, and I got it from a minority scholarship. And I was trying to make ends meet in college, and I went to my advisor. I said, "Hey, do you have any scholarships available?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry." He says, "I know just the one." He's like, "I'm on the head of a few boards. Come on in, and we'll get you straightened out." So it was his idea of a joke, or maybe not, that one of the scholarships was a minority scholarship for, it was directed towards African-American students. And
you do not look like you qualify for that.
Not quite. But, I am half Hispanic, and so he put me through just because of, my relationship with him. And so when I got to the class, there were about 38 African-American students and me. And the questions, the discussion there were questions like, how can we improve the status of the black male in America? And ask me, and I just, guys, maybe put out a poster. I don't know.
So, a real insightful answer.
Wait, so you used this as your poker bankroll?
So they, as part of the scholarship, they gave me $1,000 cash, and I went and I deposited that on Party Poker immediately. And I had been reading some poker sites, some poker forums, and I started depositing using these bonuses. You get $500 for depositing. You play through, and I just play very low stakes limit, and that's how I built my bankroll for the most part. When I got to about $10,000, I was just, playing real low limits. I decided to start playing 10-20 limit hold'em at the time, and I played for every day for about 10 hours. And near the end of the month, I had lost it all. And so at that time, you received a rake back for playing. Every time you wager, some of the pot is raked, and you get a little bit of that back, say 30% of what the site makes off you at the end of the month. So here I was, just broke, sitting on my hands, and it actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because I spent those last 10 days reviewing my hands, had everything tracked, and I found out what mistakes I was making. And when I got my money, which happened to be about $8,000, because I was a very high volume player, then with that new knowledge, I was able to go and play a lot better, make way less mistakes, and that's what helped me become very successful.
Now, what year was that?
That was, about 2004, 2005, right after Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. It's like I got started in college just playing for $5, $10 with friends. That's how I got my interest in the first place.
And so what happened then when you rebooted with this 8,000? How did the trajectory go?
Well, at that point, I was very lucky in that I started running very well when I was playing, and playing bigger. I started playing on a lot of different sites where there were almost no Americans playing on. They had websites for people in London where you played in pounds, and all kinds of different sites. And I just started winning at an astronomical pace when I would play 8, 10, 12 tables at a time. And even for stakes of, a 20-40 limit game where a big win is, a few $1,000s, I could win $60,000 a month. Just never, playing more than that, never really losing more than a few $1,000s in any given session.
So when you got to live poker, were you 21 when you started? And if not, what happened?
Well, my very first experience was at Turning Stone when I was 19, and I drove up there and played, and at the time I was doing real well, but I brought $4,000, and by the end I had lost it all, and I was sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe that you could lose so much money in one day or 1 week. And it's kind of funny because I was playing online and winning or losing 10, $20,000 in a few days. But after that, I got a little more confident, and I started playing in Vegas and LA a little bit. And I wasn't 21 at the time. So, and I didn't have a fake ID. But I don't know what I was thinking. Looking back, it was I really got into some really sticky situations. So I wouldn't recommend that anyone else would do it.
Well, if anybody knew, they have a free roll where if you beat them, then they turn you in, and they don't have to pay you. And if they beat you, well, your money's just as good. Any of that kind of...
Wait, are you talking about in a casino?
Yeah, and in a card room. If you're...
Well, but no, you buy in for cash, so you have the chips. And, I mean, you're saying the card room could confiscate your chips and not pay you? I don't think that's much of a danger. But
that's a very good question. And, that's not something I really thought about at the time. There was one point where, I was in Vegas, and I won't name the casino, but... this guy had challenged me to play him 400, 800 heads up. And
limit or no?
400, 800 limit. I'm a limit player. And I think that he knew I was underage. If not, he kept saying he was just trash talking. And he kept saying, if you beat me in one more pot, I'm going to call gaming. And he says, I'm going to call the floor man and tell them that you're underage. And he's like, and all your money's going to be mine and whatever. And, him and his wife were there, and they would take turns playing and just yelling at me. And at the time, I didn't realize that that's a very potentially dangerous situation. I thought, okay, no one's going to do anything. And I didn't even have a plan for what would happen if I was going to be carded. And as it turned out, I ended up winning about 40 or 50,000 off him. So at the end of the night, I had almost 100,000 on the table, and he didn't say anything. And I'm just very lucky that he didn't, because I don't know what would have happened. I think it would have been a huge deal, and I think the casino, they might have confiscated my money.
That could have been a real danger.
Yeah, so
because we've certainly heard of casinos doing that with underage people who hit a slot jackpot or whatever.
And yeah, I don't know. I had a similar situation.
But may I say, what an asshole the guy was. Was this a known player or just some tourist?
He is a pretty well-known player, and he's definitely what you call an action player. So I think that it was all a lot of trash talk, and at the time I had a bit of a big mouth, and so looking back I don't really know what I was thinking, but I had another situation come up in Los Angeles where we were playing, and the guy was a pretty successful plastic surgeon, and we were playing maybe 200, 400, and I was up a lot of money at the time, and it just never occurred to me that anything bad could happen. And finally, I beat him in a pot, and I made some smart comment, which I really shouldn't have been doing, being 19. And the guy calls the floor man over, and he's like, he's like, can you card this asshole? I said, the guy looks over, and the floor man, he says, hey, it's like, oh, we're not going to card him. And he says, no, he says, I'm not joking. He says, I really want you to card this guy right now. He says, can you do that? He says, or, am I going to have to leave? And so the foreman comes over, and I guess luckily for me, I'd been tipping the guy pretty generously, and he sizes me up, and he says, well, we know Tony's only 16, but we like him here, so we let him play. And he pats me on the shoulder, and he winks at me, and my heart stopped beating about 1,000 beats a minute.
Wow. And
he just let me off the hook. And I'll tell you, I definitely tipped him a lot. So if by the end of the trip, so if he didn't know then he definitely knew at the end.
Now, I know that there were I know of at least one really strong bot that had solved Limit Hold'em back then. And did you run into that? Were you a heads-up specialist, or were you playing?
I did play a lot of heads-up, and actually, when the bot first came out, they put it in a lot of the casino floors. They had a version of it where you could play against the bot with no rake, and if you wanted to, then you could play up to stakes up to 2040. So we found that
Was this live dealt or machine?
this was on a machine. So
Is this one where Phil Hellmuth would talk to you on the machine?
it's the same program, but the very first variant of it did not have that. And from what I understand, one of my friends play tested it. They found that the bot was too good against regular Square players, so they set it to a level where they felt the skill was enough that a person could beat it who maybe not beat it, but wouldn't suffer such a big disadvantage. It's no fun to lose all your money immediately. And so if the bot has a full playing strength of 100%, maybe they set it to 95 or 90%. And so it would make some very obvious mistakes, like raise and re-raise on the river with a straight or a flush possible when it didn't have it, stuff like that. And so for the average recreational player, they would lose, but for a professional heads-up player, we could win. And also, the way that they gave the ratings and the points for the machine was based off of the total pot size. So if you're playing 2040 and you put in $400 and the bot puts in $400, well, they gave you $800 worth of wagers. And the way they calculated it was that they were winning, $8, $10 off that $800 in wagers. But in reality, you were beating it. So for quite a while, we got treated pretty well at a lot of places where they were sending us, offers to come in, thousands of dollars in free play, all we could eat and drink. And after a while, I think they realized that it was a little too
generous.
It was much too generous. And they also had some bugs in the programming. A guy that I know, he found that sometimes the bot would fold if you raised up pre-flop. And that's not bad in of itself, but the player would always get the button every time a new session was started. So if you started with $20 and you're playing 2040, you could raise and it would give you credit for betting $40 even though you bet 20. So occasionally you would go all in for your $20 at a time, and the bot would fold every now and then. So if he calls, you're flipping a coin. If not, then he folds and you win $20. And so you had to cash out over and over for it to happen. And so eventually one of the surveillance teams at one of the sharper casinos did notice this guy was making hundreds and hundreds of tickets, and they did bar him, and that was real bad for him because he played a lot of poker at that place. But
my original question, though, I had some friends who solved limit hold'em long before those machines. They made many millions of dollars online.
Yeah.
Now, they actually didn't use a bot. They trained women to play. And they got accused of being bots, so much so that one of the women set up a cam in her house to show that she was actually playing. Because they won so much money. But it sounds like you didn't run into any of those kind of buzzsaws.
They do exist, but I've always been very game selective. So even I feel that someone who is very skilled would, even if they had used a computer to solve it or whatever, would not see a significant advantage. Although, with computer software or whatever, I think that they could, potentially beat me. So if I found that a game was too tough after the rake and whatever, I would just quit. So I do know that they were out there and they were playing on a lot of the poker sites, heads up for significant amounts of money. There's a lot of speculation on some of the poker forums as to which players were bots. But I think the general rule is that most of the players, and as it went later and later, that became less and less true. Most of the players were actual humans.
Yeah, as I say, they train girls how to use this strategy almost the way you would train a blackjack player to learn basic strategy. And and I know one that got accused of being a bot, and she challenged there was a particular player who every time he lost, he liked to claim that whoever he was playing against was a bot. I
do know that player very well.
And and she challenged him to play in a casino, and I think he declined the challenge. But
that sounds about right. He's got a lot of hot air, you could say.
Yeah.
Now, 10 years ago, you won a World Series of Poker bracelet.
That's correct.
I looked at the final table, and there's a bunch of nobodies like Jeff Madsen and Tom Dwan and Sam Farha and Eli Lejra and Matt Glantz and a couple names I don't recognize, but they might be very good too, Michael DeMichelle and James Mackey. It's a pretty stacked table. So what happened at that? What kind of event was it, and what happened?
Well, it was a 8-game mix event, and the buy-in was 10,000. So I think it keeps out a lot of the more recreational players, which is actually a bad thing. And beyond that, at the time, people played a lot of limit and no limit, so there wasn't as much interest in these crazy games like Triple Draw or playing Pot Limit Omaha. Wasn't as popular as it is today. So that was a big reason of why you get so many skilled players. As far as winning the tournament, it was pretty uneventful. There was one situation that came up when we were down to 2 tables, and the last woman in the field, she had a very good player, by the way. She had taken a bad beat against Sam Farha. She had Ace King, he had Ace Queen, and they got it all in for a large amount of money, way too much for Ace Queen. And there was a queen on the flop, and she lost. And I do remember that became very awkward after that, because she's wearing these big, thick sunglasses, and you could see that she started to cry, and she was tearing up behind it at first, and then it became very noticeable, and she was asking, why would you do that? Why me? Really bemoaning her luck, and there really isn't any crying in poker. So we're sitting here looking at each other, and everyone's like, I don't know what to do, and the dealer is kind of like wondering if he should deal or get a tissue, and we're just sitting there, and it went on.
Your heart's got to go out to her. I mean,
I do feel very bad for her, because very, very skilled player, and it's very tough. But in poker, no one deserves it or doesn't deserve it. So we've all been there on the other side, and we've taken it on the chin. So I don't blame her. I do feel very bad for her, but at the same time, you just got to say next hand sometimes and move on.
Well, I certainly don't know what to do when a woman starts crying.
Now, when Macau started, there was sort of a gold rush of people rushing over there to play poker for very large stakes. And you were part of that gold rush? I was there the very first week that poker was legalized. And at the time, they didn't have poker at the Wynn. I'm not even sure if the Wynn was built at that time. We played at this place called the Grand Waldo. It was not in Macau proper, but on this island next to it called Taipa. And when we were there, there was a poker tournament held by PokerStars. And we waited around for about a week for a cash game to kick off. And at the time, we had brought only U.S. dollars, but the rules there were that the U.S. dollars had to be crisp and clean. And, we had some that were, moldy and folded in half. And, we had ones that were ripped and had been in a shoebox. And so we ended up having to go to Hong Kong to change all our money. And we went, and we had to go into this dark alley, and someone recommended it to us. And there's just a guy, and there's just like a window, and it's just got a dollar sign on it, and there's nothing else. Wait, now could you change it to Hong Kong dollars? Or
we needed to change it to Hong Kong dollars because we had U.S. dollars, and so we came to the guy, and we're just thinking we're going to be killed. Some masked Asian men are going to come out and rob us with their katanas, and we say, okay, we want to change, and he doesn't speak too much English, so he just pulls out a pad of paper, and we write down how much we want to change, and he just nods his head and writes down whatever the rate is, and we say okay, and we pull out our backpack with about 100,000 in cash, and he turns around, and within like 30 seconds we have our almost 1 million Hong Kong dollars, which we stuffed into our backpack and ran directly to the ferry for.
Wow.
Was there anybody else?
I had similar things in Korea to that, where you're walking down some alley thinking, this is just not going to end well.
Am I going to die, or am I going to change my money for 1%?
Yeah.
But after that, we did end up playing a game. The stakes were $5,100 US dollars, and I think the minimum buy-in was about $30,000. And there were surprisingly almost all pros from the US. I think maybe 6 of the players, and a lot of them were Asian Americans. And there were 2 guys, two recreational players from Hong Kong, and one of them had flown in on a helicopter, and he had like a little entourage behind him, and it was clear that he just really didn't know how to play, and also that he didn't care. So he was just, when he would get a pair, or, if he had an ace king, then, it's just time to go all in. It's, basically baccarat for him. And there was another guy as well who seemed to be a little better, but about the same. So we played, and those guys lost. And, at the end of the night, we decided, hey, it's like we waited around a week for this, and, it's definitely some good action, but I don't see that poker in Macau is going to be that popular. It doesn't seem like there's so many pros here. It's just going to be like Las Vegas. But so we left after that, and that's a big regret of mine, because as it turned out, that gaming in Macau really expanded. The poker got way bigger, and the players really took to it. And if we had been around at the time, then I think we would have done really well.
You mentioned you started out as a as a limit player primarily. Of course, that was the primary game back then too. Do you prefer limit or no limit, and why?
Well, when I first started, I really preferred limit. I think that when the boom was taking off, a lot of the good players they played no limit, and that was the game that was most popular. That's the one where you could make the most money. But limit is very consistent, and no limit, there's some math involved. Limit is more, robotical and more math oriented, and that kind of plays towards my strengths. So while all these very, very good players were battling each other, I was playing limit, and just for low stakes, never really putting myself at too much risk of losing money, and it's just very, very successful. But after a while, I think no limit was the place to be when you are playing in a casino, when you're playing live, or if you're playing one table of very, very high stakes. Then in no limit, someone can make a mistake that is extremely, extremely costly. Whereas in limit, you're limited to a mistake of one bet or 2 bets, and not necessarily much more than that. So in terms of if you're playing in the casino, I think no limit or pot limit Omaha is really the way to go. But if you have the opportunity to play 5-10 tables, then I don't think there's any comparison that the limit games are just far superior in terms of your risk and in terms of how much you could make.
And did you get into tournament play? Well, obviously you won a bracelet, but did you play much tournament, or were you really more a cash game?
Not really. I only play a few tournaments, and just mostly for fun. So I just never really took to it.
Now, the mixed game format, you played like 8 different games. Uh-huh. So presumably no limit and limit were 2 of them.
That's right.
But there were 6 others.
Stud and triple draw, low ball, and some Hold'em Omaha.
So getting proficient all those, was everybody pretty proficient at all the games, or did some have, I'm good at 3 and I'm a poker player, so I can kind of figure out the other ones on the fly, or how did that work?
I would say more of the latter. I think in the poker community, in life in general, people often overestimate how smart they are or how good they are at something. And so people would say, I've played Hold'em and I've seen the Cincinnati Kid, they play stud there, and I read a book, or I read an article about playing pot limit Omaha, and so I think I'm ready to tackle it. And in the end, I think that if you do play the big bet games better, about pot limit, no limit, then you probably do have a good advantage over someone who plays the limit games well and doesn't play the big bet games. But I think with these, and then later on the 50K tournament, which has the Players Championship, which has all kinds of games, then you really should be good at all of them, because it's you can't just sit out on the sidelines for 2 or 3 or 4 games that you're not proficient at while you're waiting for the one that you are good at. And the thing is too, when you come in, everyone knows you play no limit. You've just been sitting on the sidelines, or you left for a while and you came back and now you're ready to play. People will just, they're going to be a lot more cautious of you. None of these guys are idiots, so you're not going to enjoy that big advantage. And with they take 10% of every tournament, so even if you are a little better overall, you still need to be quite a bit better in order to to see any expectation of showing a profit in the long run.
And did you play a lot of those other games online to get proficient at them prior to the tournament?
Yeah, I've played a lot of the mixed games in general, both live and online. So I had a real good idea of what was going to take place. And I think now the trend these days is they have a lot more draw games where you have your Badugi and your Badesi and all these variants where you split the pot and you're drawing towards, a Badugi is ace 2 3 4 of different suits. And a lot of these games I think are very bad for poker, and they're very bad for the players as well, because they're very slow. And there's something called the fundamental theorem of poker, and what it is that when the players make a mistake, players do something that's different than what they would do if they could see your hand, then you're benefiting. Obviously, on the river, there's one winner and one loser usually, but in all the intermediate steps, someone is profiting and someone is losing in a lot of cases. If it's limit hold'em and you're drawing to a flush, that's not true. But if one guy's got a set and the other guy's got ace high, well, that guy with ace high is sure losing a lot of money on each bet he calls. And in these draw games, they're slow, and most of the time, both people are correct to draw, and they just do the correct thing automatically. So if you have a situation where everyone plays perfectly just due to the nature of the game, then it means that the players can't really win much money. And so a lot of these games are they're flipping coins essentially, or close to it with a rake. So they're not as good anymore.
Yeah, actually, I liken that to blackjack. If you were a casino, if you were to, let's say you were a casino and you wanted to loosen your blackjack game, well, if you give the player the option to resplit aces, nobody's going to play that wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas if you give them the option to surrender, well, a lot of people play that incorrectly. So it looks like you're giving them something, but you're actually helping yourself.
Right.
So yeah, if people are naturally just going to make the right play, then you're right. It's not good for poker. It's less skill involved.
Right, and that's exactly it. It just becomes, who is a little luckier. And of course people tilt and start to play bad. But the other thing is just the pace of these games is very slow with 3 draws, and the Asian players really like to do what's called squeezing, where they grab the cards and pinch the corner and maybe offer like a side bet on, how many across it is and say, oh, you want to split the pot? It just becomes very tedious. So when you're playing 10 hands an hour, and you're paying, $30, $40 in time charge or something for a game, the only person that's going to win is the house.
Yeah.
All right, we're talking to Tony. We're going to take a brief commercial break. When we come back, we're going to ask him about cheating in online poker. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. This is more than anyone else has. Beginning 3 a.m., July 1st, you may begin earning Chevron and or Walmart gift cards. 8,334 points earned and redeemed in July earn you a $50 gift card, limit of 10. That comes out to a rate of 0.6%. which is double the normal 0.3% at South Point. It's equivalent to, at what most casinos in Vegas would call 6 times points all month for the first $83,000 plus that you play, which for most players is everything they would play. On Wednesday, July 4th, there will be a hot seat giveaway where every 3 minutes starting at 8 a.m., some lucky player will win $100 in free play. That goes for 16 hours. The first class in the free video poker series will be Tuesday, July 3rd at noon in the Silverado Lounge. The class is Jacks or Better. There are many video poker games based on Jacks or Better, and this is a good one to start. The beginner class is at noon. The intermediate class will begin about 2. At videopoker.com, it's the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. The game of the week is 100 play with quick quads. Quick quads is a 6 coins per line game where you get the quick quads, which are a 3 of a kind accompanied by 2 other cards that add up to the rank of the trips, such as 99954 or 4443 ace. In my opinion, the game is much more fun to play than regular video poker. I've not seen the 100 play version in any decent pay schedules, but when I find one, you can bet I'm going to be there. In week 6 of the video poker semester, on August 7th, I'll be teaching an 8-5 bonus poker quick quads version. That's a 99.55 game. Quick quad strategy has quite a few enhancements compared to regular strategy. They're not difficult, but you need to make those adjustments to have a good shot at winning. All right, we're talking to Tony, and he's played a lot of online poker back in the day. So, Tony, have you witnessed any cheating in online games?
I have witnessed a lot of cheating in online games, and I think to understand it, you have to know exactly what cheating is and how people would do it online. So when you read about it, you read stuff about people raising out the worst player. Sorry, they raise out the other person, the person who is not being cheated. So one person will bet, one person will raise, and the third guy will have to fold with a marginal hand that he would have called anyway. So they steal the pot, or what they'll do is they will bet, and then another guy will call, and then their confederate will raise, stringing them along. Okay, that's what I think people think of when they think of online poker cheating, basically. Either best handing people or raising other people out. And I don't think that's the most efficient way to cheat, and I really don't think that a lot of that stuff is going on at very high stakes. That's really amateur stuff.
I was just going to say, yeah, that seems like I think that's the way amateurs would cheat.
That's exactly it. So online, there are a few different ways that people, I think, might cheat. The most obvious one, and I think the most effective way, is that I have a confederate I'm playing with at the table. When I play against everyone else, I play normal and tight. But against him, I just go crazy. And we split the action. When I say we, I don't mean me. I'm not cheating. But if this player, they would split the action with this player so that, okay, I have a flush draw, I have one pair, I have nothing. I'm going to go all in a no-limit game, in a punt limit game, and my friend will call. We're just heads up now. And people will see that I'm playing crazy. I must be on tilt. Oh, maybe my wife left me or whatever. And they're going to see at the end of the night, we split it all up. So it doesn't matter if he wins or I win, but what they're doing is they're advertising. And so when another player comes in the hand, you say, well, I just saw him lose 5 stacks. He's playing really crazy. He probably has nothing. And then that person is playing their normal tight self. So they're going to make a huge mistake because what they're going to call with, what they're going to, try to bet with is going to be way different. And I do think there is quite a bit of that. And some of it comes naturally, like, I guess more organically, you could say, two friends They say, okay, let's split the action. We're going to play this very high stakes game, and maybe there's one, big player who is, just a recreational player, and so let's just split our winnings because, we're going to play. We're going to try to reduce our variance. Or in other cases, there have been times when the entire table is playing against one big whale, and everyone is splitting against him. And that guy, well, he's going to lose in the long run no matter what. That really accelerates his loss. And it still is cheating and stealing because that guy is not, getting a fair game. Even if just because you are not a professional player, that you're not a winning player, doesn't mean you can't be cheated. And another thing that they do, and I know for a fact that this happened in a lot of the highest stakes pot limit games online, is that 2 or 3 accounts will be controlled by the same person or confederates working together. And what they would do is that they would share cards. And when you see 12 cards, you can imagine if you, for instance, you have a pair of aces, but you know that, and this is in PLO, so you have 2 other side cards, but you know that the other cards are dead. You've seen them in your friend's hands. Then you would know that, okay, I'm not gonna even play this hand. Whereas other hands, by knowing the dead cards, you can put your hands, you can bet your hands very aggressively when they're very live, when they're still out there, and when you see that they're dead, then you can just fold and get away. And also, you do best hand them. The person who has the higher wrap doesn't get in, with the guy with the lower wrap. And if you are a thinking person, then
I'm sorry, what does that mean? Wrap?
So,
a higher wrap?
So a wrap would be, it's like a draw in pot limit Omaha. So say you have
7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9, 10, and your buddy has 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's a 7, and an 8 or something. Then he's drawing. You guys will both make straights. So if the third person in the hand, you and your friend both are drawing to the straight, but your straight is going to be better. So if the third person in the hand maybe has 2 pair or a set or something, then you would only take the best hand because that guy would have the lion's share of the pot, the equity, and the rest of you guys would be splitting up the crumbs. So by knowing that, you don't get in that situation. But if it were reversed, or if there were if you were not playing with the Confederate, then it would be a 3-way pot, and the guy at the bottom with the low end of the draw would be, losing nearly every dollar he puts into the pot. And a lot of stuff like that is, and, I'm sure now that there is a lot less very high stakes action. So I'm sure it's still, it's a lot less than it was before, but I have no doubt that wherever there is money, wherever there is, the way that people can collude, that they will do it. And the guys who play very high stakes are very, very smart about it. So you need to be careful. You need to know who you're playing against, and you need to really watch for, these signs of very collusive behavior. Very hard to detect. So, playing live for large amounts of money, or playing online for large amounts of money is a risk, but you can also have those same risks playing live in the casino as well.
And have you run into that in the casinos as well?
There is some cheating in the casinos, but with so many cameras, it's a lot more difficult to pull it off. People, they might signal each other, or they might mark the cards. And there have been a couple cases, and I do think they keep them pretty quiet, where there have been players who have been arrested or charged in Nevada casinos for marking the cards, maybe with the most common way is maybe like a nail. Or there's something called the gambler's crimp, which is a way to bend the cards a little bit so that they don't lie exactly flat. But when you get that card in your hand again, then you can straighten it out. And so when they're sitting on the felt, then they might be a little raised up. But I think the real risk comes from playing in these private games that you hear so much about. And, any person who's played a lot of poker knows some guy who's, he's made, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this private game. Oh, he plays in this game with, only supermodels and actors, and, everyone's blind too. But, for the most part, I think that, you take on a very big risk when you play in these private games. And I had a friend, and he played in the game, and they were using this device where you can read the barcodes on these cards. And this is a device you buy out of China, and I've heard of probably maybe like 8 or 10 games all around the country where people are using this device. And what it does is you have your phone on the rail, and it takes a snapshot of all these cards stacked up when they are presented in the correct position. So after the shuffle is done, they put it there, and what you do is you input how many players are at the table and what game you're playing. It takes the sequence of cards, and it tells you in an earpiece which hand is going to win. So you don't know what cards you're going to get. You don't know what the flop is going to be, but you do know which position is going to have the best hand when all the cards are out. And so what they'll do is that they'll wait, and then it says, okay, they're in the 3 seat. It says, hey, the 3 seats got the winner this time. And so now you look at your hand, and maybe you're playing pot limit Omaha or no limit, and you've got a deuce 7. Well, it doesn't matter, because you already know that no matter what happens, this pot's yours. So now they play, very wildly, very aggressively, and it looks like, by some miracle that they've won, but in reality, they knew all along. So that's one way that I think that they're cheating, and you have to be very, very careful, with devices at the table or whatever. Another way is with mechanics. They have a lot of guys out there are extremely, extremely good at handling the cards, and they do a lot of different things, but I think the most common one is that they deal you a cooler, or they do a lot of peeking at the next card, whatever. A cooler is where they have a setup. You get 9s, you get a set, and then a straight beats you. And a very skilled mechanic can do that just off the shuffle. But I think most of the times with hands like that, they will have a cooler deck, which is maybe they're sitting on, or they've got it in their sleeve or something, and they will switch them out whenever whenever the mark is not looking. And in order to really defend yourself from that, I think that the best thing you can do is you have to know who you're playing with. So if you know that everyone, and this guy is like the guy that you're playing with is a very rich, successful guy, or whatever, he's a businessman, and the dealer used to deal at these other places, or you just know about these people. It's almost like in the casino. The casino wants to know about who they're playing with. As a poker player, you should really know who you're playing with. And they will often use, and I've seen a couple times where they use very big names to recruit guys to this game. And if these are guys who might have won multiple World Series poker bracelets, might have been playing extremely high stakes, and they will say, hey, we've got this game here, why don't you come and play? And you need to be very suspicious. Some of these games are unraked too. They don't take any time charge, and again, that's something where I would be...
That's a red flag.
That's a red flag, because if they are raking the game very highly, then they don't need to cheat you, because they're already printing money. But if they're not, then you have to think, well, okay, this guy's taking on a lot of risk. He's, got to handle security of the game, and, maybe be responsible for payouts. And there's the legal risk as well. What's in it for him? So you need to think about it. And if you are the victim of cheating, then you need to think about what to do. And I think in most cases, what happens is that the players will say, hey, I've been cheated. And I'll tell you, that's basically the worst thing you could do. So he says, hey, I've been cheated. And let me see those cards, or I'm going to take those cards with me, or, I'm going to call the police. And, by doing that, by tipping your hand, so to speak, you basically have no chance of a good result. There have been times when the players have been cheated, and they know they've been cheated, and they've just been strong-armed or threatened, but basically being beat up or whatever to pay. So even if you know that they're cheating, accusing them is just a big mistake. What I would do personally is that I would gather proof, either by evidence, by video camera, whatever. And if I really felt that they had taken a lot of money from me, I would contact the police, and I would say, look, these guys are cheating me. here's what they're going to do. Here's what they're doing, and here's when they're going to play next. Can you come in and just, send these guys to jail or whatever? Because to be honest, if you're cheating someone, then it's theft, and those guys belong in jail. Now, some people may not agree with that, but I think that's your best chance at any sort of good outcome. Maybe talk to the gaming commission in your state, something like that. Video evidence, but trying to grab the cards off the table and run out of the place or anything like that, it's just going to lead to nothing. Any sort of violence, whatever, it's just not worth it for, a couple buy-ins in a private game or something like that. So that's my opinion, at least.
When you were playing online, were you able to observe any tells? We've had people say that you can't really get tells on online poker.
So I think online, and I play limit, but I've also played a lot of no limit and pot limit too. I think there are very big tells, just very similar to live poker. And when you play heads up, it's a lot more noticeable. But the very generic tells, at least in limit poker, are someone takes a long time on the river and then they bet that they usually have a pretty decent hand. If they call very fast on the flop and they raise you on the turn, then a lot of times, especially if they call very slowly on the flop and then they raise you very quickly on the turn, a lot of times that means like a very strong hand. But I think a lot of it is very player specific. And yeah, I've played with heads up with players that they will do everything, within a half second. And then all of a sudden that you notice that they take a second or 2 seconds to do something. And, it could be that maybe they got a phone call, maybe the pizza's here. But a lot of times that they are thinking, and people just they think the same way over and over. So I've played against guys who, when they take 2 seconds, they're bluffing. When they raise really, really fast over and over, they've got it. And it's very, very player specific. But I do know that against especially some of the more recreational players who are not careful about that, a lot of them have, just really, really noticeable timing tells where people are making a lot of money off them because they know it. And for No Limit 2, if you've ever watched any of the really, really successful players' videos, that they will do a lot of things which in a live game you might call Hollywooding or whatever, especially on the river, where they will take a very long time and maybe even use part of their time bank and then make a really big bet with either a good hand or a bluff. And the reason they do this is a lot of times they know that immediately, within seconds, what the course of action is, but they need to protect themselves for the times when they need to think, is this a good bluff? Should I make this big value bet here? And giving your opponent the information that you've got a tough decision can be very valuable to them. So to protect themselves, sometimes they'll take a very, very long time and then bluff, because a lot of times you hear players say, well, I really wanted to bluff, but I waited too long, so he'll know that I'm bluffing. Well, by that logic, every time you've got a great hand, you should just wait a very long time, because he's going to know that you're bluffing. And so, in poker, it's all about balancing your range, being able to have more than one hand in a given situation. And so, using the timing, both online and live, is just a really, really big part of it.
So are there any, for people who are, well, first of all, what do you see as the big mistakes that people are making that, to get to the next level? What are the big mistakes that they're making that they need to overcome?
Sure. I think that they really need to take their time. And this is something that people have a big problem with online, and not so much live. When you play live in the casino, it's so slow. Everyone is always thinking about what to do. But online, people are clicking very fast. They're making their decisions instantly. They said, okay, well, I missed, I'm going to fold. Or I didn't hit my flush draw or my straight draw. Or I've only got one pair. He's got to have it. And I think the most successful players, they're really taking their time about each decision, and they're really thinking, okay, it's like I did miss, but maybe there's some chance. And then they're looking at the pot and the odds, and they're just really thinking about every hand, playing automatic, I think, is the most dangerous thing. And that's why when people are playing 8, 10, 12 tables, they are making some bad decisions, because you can't think about every hand when you're playing so many tables. And the guys that I've seen that are most successful, they really, really think through every hand. They're trying 100% all the time. They don't play when they're tired or sleepy, or they don't say, okay, I'm just going to call. And I've seen situations where people will call with the nut low because they've said, okay, this guy's bluffing, and the board will pair twice, and now they have a 3 high and stuff like that. And that really does hurt you. Each decision is pretty important. So I think that you find that it's easy to get fatigued after 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, but you really need to think very deeply about each hand. And when I was first started playing, I was reading this forum 2+2, and a lot of the guys who posted there, one of them was this guy. His name was Nate the Great, and his real name is Nate Silver. He has the blog at 538. Very famous stats guy, and he played 10-20 and 30-60 limit before he got famous. Before he got famous, that's right. Yeah. And the stuff that he would write when he was playing, he would talk about a hand, and I think to myself, well, if I'm playing the same hand, it's like, okay, I got a pair. I'm just going to play. Let's just see the river. Maybe I'll win. That would be my logic. But, when he would write about it, he would say, okay, here's what I was thinking, and this is why I thought it, and here's what I thought he could have, and this is, why I decided to whatever. The result is the same, but his thought process is much more advanced. And so, in 90% of hands, 95% of hands, you guys are going to have the same conclusion. But that other difference is what separates, the very good players from, the weak ones, and especially in no limit. So I think I would just really try to think about these hands and apply, 100% of your brain power. Don't be listening to music. Don't be, texting your mistress or whatever. Just give it your all.
And you mentioned 2+2, but are there any particular books or websites that you would recommend to people who are trying to get their game to the next level?
I do think it's very tough right now, because when I was playing, there were a lot of posters on all those sites, because there were so many players coming up, and all my best friends, they all were posting at the same time. We were all just a bunch of 18 to 21-year-olds posting on this forum, trying to learn about poker and trying to move up stakes. And there was, you could say, a fraternity of us, unwashed internet players that were underage players that were, learning together and whatever, building our bankrolls together.
The halabalas?
Yeah. Not quite, but
but really, they were the same kind of thing. Same age. Same age, same...
that's right.
8 guys living in a house.
Some of those guys turned out to be pretty damn good players.
Yeah. They were all very successful. And we didn't have any catchy names or, any... I guess you could say we weren't quite that cool, but, on the limit side of things. But still, that was very, very beneficial. So I would say that the best thing you can do is find people who think the same way, who are, trying in similar stakes, and just constantly be sharing hands, showing them, how you're playing. And some of the videos that are out there, I think Phil Galfond has a lot of videos, and he's a very, very excellent player. He explains things really well. And some of his videos or whatever, they have these training sites now, and you get a wide variety of quality from the people who are making the videos. But there are a few good videos out there. The one thing I would caution is that people will take these and they will go down to their local casino. So they'll watch the video and say, okay, time to play like Phil. And then here they are, and they're betting the river all in, putting the fourth bet in pot limit Omaha against, a 90-year-old man. And so, obviously the guy will always have the straight or whatever. You really need to take what you're watching and, put it into context. And that's what I see a lot of the players who are trying to learn like that, not every game is 200, 400 pot limit Omaha against the best in the world. And you got to, remember that he's probably not going to do the same thing if, in your hand. So it's all about context.
All right. Now, we actually have a lot more questions for Tony. He has agreed to come back next week. So we're going to say goodbye to him today. But if you like what he said today, pretty good chance you'll like what he said next week too. If you thought he sucked this week, well, take next week off. But thank you, Tony. It's been very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Go out and get royal flushes, everybody. Good day.